There are some phone calls that change your life forever, and then there are phone calls that come far too late. 22 missed calls, all from the same person. My brother Daniel, the same man who stood beside our father's grave pretending to cry while he already knew he had taken everything. The same man who watched me lose my home, my marriage, and nearly my mind without saying a single word. For 4 years, Daniel Mercer acted like I no longer existed. No birthday calls, no apologies. No explanations, just silence. But one night, after seeing my face on national television, he called me 22 times in less than 3 hours. And what he said in the final voicemail changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Most people believe betrayal comes from strangers. They believe the people who share your blood would never destroy you for money. But the truth is, some families are held together by secrets, and the moment those secrets are threatened, love disappears faster than you can imagine. My father used to say that wealth reveals character. I never understood what he meant until the day he died. Because the morning after we buried him, my brother became someone I didn't recognize anymore. Looking back now, I think he had been waiting for that moment for years. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because stories like this are more common than people realize, and sometimes the people smiling beside you at the dinner table are already planning what they'll do once you're no longer useful to them. I grew up in a small town outside Denver, Colorado. The kind of place where people still waved at neighbors and everyone showed up for church on Sundays even if they barely believed anymore. My father, Richard Mercer, owned a construction company he built from nothing after returning from the military in the late 70s. He was respected everywhere. Men admired him. Women trusted him. And for most of my childhood, I believed he was the strongest person I knew. But strength can look very different behind closed doors. My mother spent most of her life protecting my father's image while hiding how distant he had become from all of us, especially after my older brother Daniel entered the business. Daniel was 6 years older than me, confident in ways I never was. He knew how to walk into a room and make people listen. Teachers loved him. My father practically worshipped him. When Daniel joined the company after college, Dad introduced him to everyone as the future of the Mercer legacy. I remember hearing those words while standing only a few feet away carrying coffee for both of them. It sounds small now, but moments like that stay with you. They slowly teach you where you stand inside your own family. I was the emotional one, the dependable one. While Daniel learned contracts and investments, I stayed close to home helping my mother care for my father's health issues as he got older. I handled hospital appointments. I stayed overnight after surgeries. I cooked meals when my mother was exhausted. Daniel always had an excuse: business meeting, out-of-town client, important conference. But every time he finally showed up, Dad lit up like a child seeing a hero walk through the door. It hurt more than I ever admitted out loud. About 2 years before my father died, things inside our family started changing in ways that didn't make sense at the time. Daniel became unusually involved in my father's finances. He insisted on handling paperwork personally. He started taking private calls with Dad behind closed doors. Sometimes I'd walk into the kitchen and both of them would stop talking immediately. My mother noticed it too, but whenever I asked questions, she brushed them aside. "Your brother is just helping your father manage stress," she'd say, but it didn't feel like help. It felt like control. Then came the hospital incident. I still think about it almost every night. My father had been admitted after suffering chest pains during a company dinner. The doctors wanted him monitored for several days. I arrived at the hospital early the next morning carrying fresh clothes and coffee, but the nurse at the front desk looked confused when I gave my name. She told me only immediate approved family members were allowed upstairs. I laughed at first because I thought it was some kind of mistake. Then she quietly explained that Daniel had updated the visitor list the previous evening. My name had been removed. I stood there frozen. My own brother had blocked me from seeing my father while he was lying in a hospital bed. I remember calling Daniel over and over that morning. No answer. Finally, around noon, he texted me only 5 words. "Dad needs less stress right now." I must have read that message 100 times. Less stress, as if I was some outsider causing problems instead of the daughter who spent years taking care of our father, while Daniel chased business deals across the country. Things only became stranger after that. Dad stopped answering my calls regularly. When I visited the house, Daniel was suddenly always there. He would answer questions for Dad before he could speak himself. He controlled conversations, he controlled access. And slowly my father started looking different, not physically at first, emotionally, quiet, distracted, almost nervous sometimes. Once, while my mother was outside gardening and Daniel was taking a call in another room, my father grabbed my wrist unexpectedly. His hands were shaking. He looked toward the hallway to make sure Daniel wasn't nearby before whispering something I didn't fully understand at the time. He said, "If anything happens to me, don't trust paperwork you didn't see signed." Then Daniel walked back into the room and my father immediately went silent. At the time, I convinced myself he was confused from medication. I wanted to believe that because the alternative was too painful. The alternative meant my father was afraid of his own son. 3 months later, he was dead. The official cause was heart failure. Peaceful, unexpected, but natural. That's what everyone kept saying at the funeral while people shook our hands and spoke in soft, sympathetic voices. But nothing about that week felt peaceful. Daniel controlled every detail. He chose the funeral home. He handled legal matters. He answered questions before anyone else could. Even during the service, he stood near my mother like a politician protecting his image. And somehow, despite grieving harder than I'd ever grieved in my life, I kept feeling this terrible pressure in my chest like something was deeply wrong. The will reading happened 2 days later in a downtown office building I'd never been to before. I still remember the smell of polished wood and old coffee inside that conference room. Daniel sat across from me wearing a dark blue suit and checking his phone while the attorney organized papers at the head of the table. My mother barely looked at me once. I should have noticed that too. The attorney cleared his throat and began reading. At first it sounded normal, personal items, donations, business details, then suddenly everything shifted. The company ownership transferred entirely to Daniel. The family house transferred entirely to Daniel. Investment accounts, land, property, savings, retirement assets, everything transferred entirely to Daniel Mercer. I remember waiting for my portion to be mentioned because surely there had to be some mistake. But then the attorney paused before quietly saying, "To my daughter, Emily Mercer, I leave my love and prayers for her future." That was it. No property, no savings, nothing. I actually laughed at first because my brain couldn't process what I had just heard. My father would never have done that, not after everything, not after years of caring for him, not after promising me countless times that the family would always be protected equally. But when I looked up, Daniel wasn't surprised at all. He just sat there watching me carefully like he had rehearsed this moment in his head many times before. I asked to see the will myself. Daniel immediately became defensive. The attorney hesitated before sliding the document toward me, and that's when I noticed something strange. My father's signature looked rushed, uneven, almost shaky. It didn't look like the signature I remembered from birthday cards and handwritten notes. When I questioned it, Daniel leaned back in his chair and said something I'll never forget. Dad knew who he could trust in the end. I felt something break inside me hearing those words. What happened next destroyed whatever remained of our family. Within 3 weeks, Daniel informed me the house would be sold, and I needed to remove my belongings from the guest property where I had been staying temporarily after my divorce. My mother never defended me once. Not once. I kept waiting for her to step in and say this had gone too far, but she stayed silent through all of it. Looking back now, I realize silence can betray you just as deeply as cruelty. The day I left that property was cold and raining hard. I loaded my suitcases into an old sedan while strangers hired by my brother walked through the house placing stickers on furniture for auction. 4 years earlier, I had sat beside my father's hospital bed praying he would survive. Now his son was throwing me out into the rain like I meant nothing at all. And that should have been the end of the story. But 4 years later, my brother saw me on television. And suddenly he couldn't stop calling. For the first few weeks after leaving the property, I kept telling myself there had to be some explanation, some misunderstanding, some legal mistake that would eventually be corrected once everyone calmed down from the grief. People don't just erase their own daughter from a lifetime of sacrifice overnight. At least that's what I wanted to believe. But grief has a dangerous way of making people hopeful long after hope should have disappeared. I stayed in cheap motels at first, paying nightly rates with the small amount of savings I still had from my part-time nursing assistant job. Every morning I woke up expecting a phone call from my mother. Every evening I checked my voicemail, hoping my brother had finally developed a conscience. Neither ever happened. After about a month, reality settled in fully. I was alone, completely alone. Friends who once filled our family home during holidays suddenly stopped answering messages. Some probably feared getting involved in a legal dispute. Others had already chosen Daniel's side because wealth has a strange effect on people. They assume the successful person must also be the truthful one. And Daniel knew exactly how to use that. Around town, he told people I had become unstable after Dad's death. He implied I was angry because I expected money I didn't deserve. He spoke calmly and professionally while I was emotional and struggling financially, which made his version easier for people to believe. Eventually, I started sleeping in my car behind a 24-hour grocery store outside Colorado Springs. I wish I could say I handled it with strength and dignity, but the truth is far uglier than that. There were nights I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Nights I replayed every memory with my father, searching for clues that maybe he truly had stopped loving me before he died. That question haunted me more than losing the inheritance itself. Money can be rebuilt. But believing your own parent rejected you changes something deep inside a person. Around that time, Daniel's face started appearing everywhere online. Local business magazines praised him for expanding the company. He gave interviews talking about continuing our father's legacy. Every time I saw those headlines, I felt sick, because the version of Daniel the public saw was nothing like the man I knew privately. They saw confidence, success, leadership. They didn't see the brother who blocked me from the hospital or watched me become homeless without lifting a finger. And slowly, I began understanding something terrifying. Daniel wasn't ashamed of what he did. He believed he had won. About 8 months after Dad's death, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Linda Pierce, and she had worked as my father's bookkeeper for almost 2 decades before retiring. Her voice sounded nervous from the moment I answered. She told me she had debated contacting me many times but was afraid of causing trouble. Then she said something that immediately made my heart race. "Your father tried to reach you the week before he died." I sat upright in my car listening carefully while rain hit the windshield around me. Linda explained that Dad had called the office late one evening asking for old financial files connected to property transfers and trust accounts. According to her, he seemed agitated and distracted. When she asked if everything was all right, he told her, "I made a mistake trusting the wrong person." At first, I thought she meant a business partner, but then she continued, "Emily, your father sounded afraid of Daniel." That sentence changed everything. Linda agreed to meet me 2 days later at a diner outside town. I remember arriving early because I barely slept the night before. My mind kept replaying every strange interaction from Dad's final months. The hospital restrictions, the hidden conversations, the nervous look in his eyes when he warned me about paperwork. Suddenly, all of it felt connected. Linda arrived carrying an old leather folder pressed tightly against her chest. She looked around nervously before sliding into the booth across from me. Then she opened the folder. Inside were copies of financial transfers from company accounts dating back nearly 7 years. Large amounts of money had been moved quietly through shell accounts connected to Daniel. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Linda explained she initially assumed Dad approved the transfers because Daniel handled most executive operations by then. But shortly before his death, Dad began questioning transactions he couldn't remember authorizing. According to Linda, he believed someone inside the family business had been stealing from him for years. I already knew the answer before she said the name. Daniel. I felt physically cold hearing it confirmed aloud. Not because I was surprised anymore, but because it meant my father likely discovered the truth shortly before dying. Which raised another question I couldn't stop thinking about. If Dad realized Daniel had betrayed him financially, why would he suddenly leave him everything in the will? The more I thought about it, the less sense the entire situation made. That night I listened to one of the last voicemails my father left me months earlier. I had avoided hearing it because the grief was too painful, but this time I noticed something different in his voice. Fear. He sounded rushed, distracted, like someone listening carefully while speaking. The message was short. Hey sweetheart, just checking in. I may need to talk to you soon about some important things. I love you. Then silence. At the end of the recording, faintly in the background, I heard Daniel's voice asking, "Who are you talking to?" My stomach dropped instantly. Over the next year, my life became divided into two parts: survival during the day, investigation at night. I worked double shifts at a rehabilitation center while quietly gathering pieces of information connected to my father's finances. Most nights I returned exhausted to a tiny rented room above an auto repair garage where I lived beside a loud highway. But despite how miserable those years were, something inside me had changed. I was no longer grieving only the loss of my father. I was chasing the truth. The breakthrough came completely by accident. One afternoon, I received a letter addressed to my father forwarded from an old storage facility outside Denver. Apparently, the monthly payments on a private unit had stopped after his death, and management was preparing to auction its contents. At first, I almost ignored it because I assumed it contained old furniture or business equipment. But something about it bothered me. Dad had never mentioned renting a storage unit to anyone. I drove there the following morning. The facility manager unlocked the unit while explaining that my father had kept it for years under a private contract. The metal door lifted slowly, revealing dusty boxes stacked against the walls beneath dim yellow lighting. At first glance, nothing seemed important. Old photo albums, military jackets, filing boxes. But then I noticed a locked cabinet in the corner. The manager allowed me to force it open since I was listed as immediate family. Inside that cabinet was the moment my entire life changed. There were cassette tapes labeled in my father's handwriting, legal folders, insurance records, handwritten notes, and beneath all of it, sealed carefully inside a large envelope, was another will. My hands shook opening it. This version divided everything equally between Daniel and me. But that wasn't even the worst part. Attached to the document was a handwritten note from my father dated only 3 weeks before his death. I still remember every word because I've read them hundreds of times since then. If this document is missing or changed, it was not by my choice. I couldn't breathe. For several minutes, I just sat on the floor staring at those words while years of confusion crashed together all at once. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had tried to warn me, which meant the will Daniel presented after the funeral had almost certainly been altered. Then I found the tapes. Most contained ordinary family recordings, but one was labeled simply, "In case something happens." I borrowed an old cassette player from the storage office and pressed play. At first there was only static, then my father's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, I either waited too long or trusted the wrong people." I froze completely. Dad sounded exhausted, older than I remembered. He continued speaking slowly, explaining he had discovered financial discrepancies connected to Daniel months earlier. He admitted confronting him privately, but said Daniel became aggressive and defensive. Then came the sentence that haunted me afterward more than any other. I think your brother is capable of things I never wanted to believe." I started crying immediately. Not graceful tears, full-body grief. Because in that moment, after years of questioning my own memories, I finally understood something clearly. My father had been trying to protect me before he died. He simply ran out of time. From that point on, everything accelerated. I contacted an attorney specializing in estate fraud who agreed to review the documents quietly. She confirmed the signature on the will presented after Dad's death showed signs of possible manipulation. Dates also appeared inconsistent with medical records from his hospitalization. Meanwhile, additional financial investigations uncovered even larger theft connected to Daniel than we originally suspected. Company funds had been disappearing for nearly a decade. But here's what shocked me most. My mother knew. At first, I refused to believe it. Even after evidence started pointing toward her involvement, I defended her constantly. But the truth became impossible to ignore after Linda revealed she personally warned my mother about suspicious transfers years earlier. According to Linda, Mom begged her not to report anything publicly because she feared destroying the family. Destroying the family. As if protecting theft mattered more than protecting truth. That realization broke something inside me permanently. Over the next 2 years, while legal investigations quietly developed behind the scenes, my own life slowly began improving in ways I never expected. Ironically, losing everything forced me to rebuild myself completely from the ground up. I started writing online about grief and family betrayal late at night after work. At first, almost nobody read it. But eventually, messages began arriving from strangers sharing their own experiences with inheritance disputes, manipulative siblings, and parents who played favorites until the day they died. Women especially connected with the stories. Many were older mothers abandoned by children they sacrificed everything for. Others had lost homes after spouses died. Some simply carried decades of pain from families that valued money more than loyalty. For the first time in years, I no longer felt invisible. My words mattered to people. One article in particular spread far beyond anything I expected. It was titled, "The Cruelest Betrayals Rarely Come from Strangers." Within weeks, a producer from a national daytime documentary series contacted me asking if I would share my story publicly during a special episode about inheritance manipulation and financial abuse inside families. At first, I refused immediately. The idea terrified me. But then I thought about my father's recording sitting hidden in my apartment drawer. I thought about the years of silence, the lies, the humiliation, and for the first time I stopped worrying about protecting people who never protected me. I accepted the invitation. The television studio was in New York City. I remember feeling completely out of place walking through those bright hallways while makeup artists adjusted microphones around me. Everyone kept calling me brave, but honestly I felt sick with fear. Because despite everything Daniel had done, part of me still dreaded exposing the truth publicly. Family loyalty can survive even after love dies. Minutes before filming began, the producer asked if my brother knew I was appearing on the show. No, I answered quietly. That changed faster than I expected. The interview itself lasted almost an hour. I spoke calmly about my father, the altered will, the years of manipulation, and the recordings discovered inside the storage unit. I never screamed, never insulted Daniel. I simply told the truth, and somehow that made the story even more powerful. The audience became emotional almost immediately. Several people cried openly while I described sleeping in my car after the funeral. Then near the end, the host asked me one final question. If your brother is watching right now, what would you say to him? I paused for several seconds before answering. I would ask him whether any amount of money was worth losing his family forever. The studio fell silent. That episode aired nationally 3 nights later. I was staying alone in a hotel room when my phone started vibrating around midnight. Daniel. The first call lasted only seconds because I couldn't force myself to answer. Then came another, and another. Within an hour there were 12 missed calls. By morning there were 22. Along with the calls came voicemails. The first sounded controlled, nervous but controlled. Emily, please call me back, we need to talk. The fifth voicemail sounded angrier. You had no right discussing family matters publicly. By the 10th call, his voice began shaking. You don't understand what's happening right now. Then came the final voicemail. I still remember hearing him cry for the first time in my life. They're investigating everything. Please call me. I never meant for it to go this far. I listened to that message repeatedly, trying to understand whether he felt genuine guilt or simply fear because his lies were collapsing publicly. Maybe both. In the end, I'm not sure it mattered anymore. A week later, against every instinct telling me not to, I agreed to meet him. We chose a quiet diner outside Chicago because Daniel claimed he needed privacy. When I arrived, he looked nothing like the confident businessman from magazine covers. He appeared exhausted, older. His hands trembled while lifting coffee to his mouth. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then finally, Daniel looked at me and said, Dad was going to ruin me. No apology, no denial, just that sentence. Over the next hour, pieces of the truth came out slowly. He admitted altering legal documents connected to the will. He admitted hiding financial theft through company accounts. He admitted isolating Dad during his final months after realizing exposure was possible. But the worst confession came near the end of our conversation. Mom knew I changed the will, he whispered. I felt physically numb hearing him confirm it directly. According to Daniel, my mother justified staying silent because she feared scandal would destroy the company and leave all of us financially ruined. She convinced herself protecting Daniel protected the family itself. That kind of thinking destroys people more quietly than violence ever could. Before leaving, Daniel asked if I hated him. I thought carefully before answering. No, I finally said, I think you hated yourself long before any of this happened. That was the last time I ever saw my brother in person. Over the following year, multiple financial investigations moved forward against him connected to fraud and embezzlement. Civil lawsuits followed shortly after. My mother sold the family house quietly and moved to Arizona, where we barely speak now except during occasional holidays. As for the inheritance itself, parts of the estate were eventually redistributed legally after evidence from the recordings and original documents surfaced. But by then, the money barely mattered anymore. Because the strangest part of losing everything is discovering who you become afterward. If my father had died and left life unchanged, I probably would have remained invisible forever. Quiet, dependent on family approval, afraid of conflict. Instead, betrayal forced me to rebuild an entirely different life, one based on truth rather than appearances. And maybe that's the part stories like this rarely talk about. Sometimes the people who break you also accidentally free you. I still think about those 22 missed calls sometimes, especially late at night when the world gets quiet enough for old memories to return. Part of me wonders what would have happened if I answered immediately. Would Daniel have apologized sooner? Would anything have changed? Honestly, I don't think so. Because some damage reaches a point where apologies become meaningless. You can forgive someone and still never trust them again. You can understand why someone hurt you and still choose to walk away forever. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stop begging for love from people who already decided your pain was acceptable. My father once said wealth reveals character. He was right. It revealed my brother's greed, my mother's silence, and eventually, my own strength. If your own family betrayed you for money, would you ever forgive them?